Hello, it is the 6th of August here in Calgary, Alberta. Welcome to Rogue Intel by Prime Rogue Inc. Today we are going to have a discussion of why there is some possibility that the coming Iranian attack against Israel is far more likely to be successful in nature than Operation True Promise as we saw in April. After the assassination of Khamenei in Tehran, many would argue that Iran has been forced into a response, at least from domestic audience cost perspectives. All the while, Hezbollah and Hamas, two of its main proxies in the region, have been virtually decimated by Israeli strikes since then. So, if we look back to True Promise in April, it was a significant escalation in that it represented the first modern Iranian attack on Israeli soil, but it was also quite limited in scope. About 300 drones and missiles targeted Israel. These were mostly shot down by American, Israeli, and Jordanian air assets. Jordan had opened up its airspace, if I'm not mistaken, to the Americans, but was certainly shooting down on its own. And we want to take a look at some of the assets that were used by Iran in this strike and demonstrate that these were their lower end assets and they weren't necessarily used to full operational capacities. So one of the assets that was used quite a bit there was the Fateh 110. It's a SRBM, a short range ballistic missile with a range of approximately 300 kilometers. That gives a pretty easy launch track for Israeli defense systems. The other main, strategic or operational missile that was used was the Zulfiqar. It's an upgrade of the Fateh 110, notably in terms of range, as it has a range of about 700 clicks, and it's oriented to hit more strategic targets. But again, it's not a long-range missile. It's still liquid fuel. So it's not exactly their high-end stuff. And a lot of what was launched was also the Shahed 136 drone, which we've seen Russia launch to pretty significant effect against Ukrainian assets. But again, Ukrainian air defenses have been kind of poor, and this has been used mostly at the tactical to low operational level. The warhead weight on a Shahed is only 30 to 50 kg. So even though it has a range of like 2,500 kilometers, it's not exactly the most powerful asset that the Iranians are capable of deploying. So one of the predicates of the argument that I'm making here is that in relation to what the Iranians threw up back in April, this was not even close to their full capacity. In fact, some of the assets that were not used include the Shahab 3, which is the medium-range ballistic missile that can reach ranges up to 2,000 clicks with a much larger payload, which would allow, of course, for strikes to take place from deeper within Iranian territory. Perhaps more importantly, and we don't know exactly how many of these Iran has, but the Seiji missile. It's a two-stage missile, range of 2,500 kilometers. It is rapid launch in as much as it is a solid fuel design, which will allow it to be shot fast and from further out in Iran. Travel distance of a rocket from Iran to Iraq is between 12 and 16 minutes. So more powerful rockets launched quicker does have the potential to contribute to the type of saturation wave attack that I'm going to be discussing in a little bit. And finally, we did not see any of the Iran Mohajer 6 drones, which have been spotted in theaters worldwide, not worldwide, throughout Iran's areas of operations, I should say. And now, it's not like I'm necessarily claiming that these are going to get through en masse, but these are quite interesting in that they're far more sophisticated, and they actually carry munitions of their own. They're not loitering munitions or quote unquote suicide drones like the Shahed 136. Rather, they do carry their own payload, which could, in theory, be distributed at multiple sites. But I don't expect these to necessarily play a major role in the coming Iranian offensive. But if one did get through, I mean, it could potentially hit up to 4 targets. So what we're going to delve into right now is basically the unused capabilities that Iran just did not deploy during the last attack, and we're going to basically try to understand what Iran's missile and rocket capabilities are along with those of its proxies, and what it could potentially do now. So, as I mentioned, we're likely to see the same stuff that was used in True Promise in April, so that's the Fateh 110 and the Zulfikar. So the Fateh, about 300 kilometer range. It was theoretically used for precision strikes, but basically none of them got through. One of the other things that makes it difficult for Iran to use is that Iran is very dependent on Erector missile launchers rather than actual missile silos, which thus creates a context in which it's kind of inherently telegraphing its operations, and that it has to mount all these Erectors at launch sites across the country, which increases the likelihood of Israel having the chance to launch a preemptive strike, which I'm sure as hell Israel is not afraid of doing. But the Zulfikar 700 click range, it does have a longer distance capacity, but considering Israel's possession of F-35s, if it knew of an imminent launch, it could certainly hit them from standoff distance, or without breaching Iranian radar range. So we also have capabilities that weren't used, like I was talking about, the Shahab 3, 2,000 kilometer range. I'm expecting to see some of these used. It can reach central Israel from deep within Iran. So this would allow Iran to engage in far more strategic targeting without exposing its launch sites to retaliation or preemptive strikes. And if Iran was to use the Shahab 3, this increased distance from launching attack would definitely complicate Israeli interception efforts and would enhance surprise elements because the greater standoff range, and second, the greater distance to launch. In turn, the Seji, because it's a two-stage solid fuel missile with a range of 2,500 clicks, would have a very similar capability with that 12 to 16 minute travel time, and it would very much potentially offer Iran its greatest bang for its buck in terms of making the squeeze worth the juice worth the squeeze, in that because it's solid fuel, it can be launched quicker and iteration is more possible. So this could be used to launch at any target in Israel, and of course this is a significantly more destructive capability. Now, if we're looking at a map of the territory that's under consideration here, let's have a quick look at what Iran has to do in targeting Israel. The main route does involve overflight, I should say, of at least two countries. So we're seeing that here, some of these bases in western Iran would involve overflying Kuwait, then Saudi Arabia, then Jordan. And we've seen Jordan's willingness to put its own planes into the sky to help defend Israel. Now, this time around, Iran has threatened that it would strike at any Arab state that did so, but I don't necessarily believe that's a credible statement, considering that Iran is basically in somewhat of a mess right now. But this other route here, this kind of northwestern route to strike at Israel from Iranian launch sites, is the one that I would view with a greater degree of fear. And the reason for that, let's get these other arrows off the way, is that it can minimize the amount of time that Iranian missiles need to fly over areas in which anti-Iranian sentiment is likely to be significant in nature. Now, if you look at this flight pattern here, it flies over Iraq, and I didn't get the arrow right, but you can fly it basically over Iraq and then over Syria, like as such. And in so doing, you can either bypass Jordanian airspace or hit little to none of Jordanian airspace. And while this would certainly limit the strategic assets that Iran could launch to sites within northern Israel, if Iran's goal is to simply, quote unquote, give Israel a black eye by killing people or destroying infrastructure, this might be something it would be interested in doing in the context of the saturation and wave attack paradigm that I'm going to be discussing in a little bit. So if we're combining the potential to use Fateh 110s, Zolfagars, Shahab 3s, Sagis, along with the Makajer drones, there are also the Carrere drones, what Iran is going to be trying to do is going to be trying, and I have another video on this that I'll link in the description, to overwhelm the multi-layered nature of Israeli defense systems. Now, if we look at the Iron Dome, basically there are Iron Dome sites distributed throughout the country, and these are primarily oriented towards rocket and small missile fire, have a really high interception rate, albeit interceptions are super costly. It costs about $40,000 to $50,000 US to shoot down one Katyusha rocket, which could be worth like 300 to 400, 200 at the low end, or even a decoy. This is complemented by David's Sling, by the Arrow anti-ballistic missile system, and by Patriot batteries that have been loaned to Israel by the US. Now, the hypothesis with regards to how and why Israeli air defenses are likely to be overwhelmed if Iran is not telegraphing its attack. And one of my hypotheses, actually, it's not a hypothesis, I'm convinced that Iran purposefully telegraphed its April attack, the Operation True Promise, because it did not, at that point, want to escalate to full-scale regional war. There are a few reasons for that. It didn't use its high-end assets, and it didn't engage in saturation fire from its proxies. Now, if we look at proxies, let's delete this arrow here. Iran's main proxies are obviously Hezbollah in Lebanon. We have Hamas in the Gaza Strip right here. We even have the Houthis in Yemen, although, I mean, good luck overflying Saudi Arabia like that. We have militias in Syria, and to a certain extent militias in Iraq, although it's also very likely that the Iraqi militias would attempt to attack American assets either in Iraq or Syria. Let me change the arrow color for that, because there are likely to be attacks on American assets at the very same time. But if you're seeing the multi-directionality of this fire, you've got southbound fire from Lebanon, fire going to the northeast from the Gaza Strip, fire going to the northwest from Yemen, Syria, and so on. And what is likely to happen is this, in my opinion. If we zoom in and take a closer look, we need to take into account the fact that in the context of the multi-layered system that's used by Israel, the Iron Dome can be overwhelmed. Each Iron Dome battery can track about 20 targets at once, although that is theoretically classified. I'm not giving you classified information, I'm saying it might be more, in that I don't know. David's Sling's tracking capacities are estimated to be around 8 to 10 at a time. Arrow, about the same. Patriots have a localized range of effect. But what's likely to happen, either in the initial stages or in the later stages of an attack, let's go back to red arrows, is that we would logically expect Hezbollah, Hamas, and potentially rebels in Syria, potentially Yemen, but let's forget about Yemen right now, to engage in mass fires of rockets. So what we would see that would first differ from Operation True Promise in April is significant coordination with these regional proxies. And Hezbollah in Lebanon has about 150,000 rockets and missiles that range all the way, as I was saying, from the several $100 Katyushas to longer range or medium range missiles like the Fateh 110 that's been launched by Iran proper. If we want to take a look at Lebanon, Hezbollah's area of operations vis-a-vis Israel, this red cone here is rocket range, and it basically covers Haifa. And if we're looking at the Qassam and Fateh rockets, they are capable of targeting pretty much anywhere in Israel from Lebanon. So with Hezbollah known to have the capacity to crank off several hundred rockets per minute. And again, this would depend on whether or not Israel was capable of engaging in effective counter battery fire or preemptive strikes against these targets. Any successful attack, and again, my predicate is that this is what is going to happen, is going to involve mass fires being launched from Lebanon. That in and of itself is not necessarily a challenge, because a lot of them will be intercepted by the Iron Dome, and others will be tracked by David's Sling and by the Patriot batteries, given that there are these Fateh rockets that have been launched from Iran proper as theater-level operational assets at Israel. But now we're also going to see launches from Gaza, and my expectation is that the combination of launches from southern Lebanon, Hezbollah territory, Gaza potentially, Syria, potentially even Iraq, is going to essentially saturate and overload the Iron Dome. Israel's going to have the Iron Dome. It's going to have its Air Force in the air, likely conducting retaliatory strikes in real time. Lots of people are going to be dying in Lebanon, fewer people in Israel. But that's not really the point. The point is that what I'm expecting while this is happening, and while these low-cost, ineffective assets are saturating Iron Dome, David's Sling, and Patriot capabilities, this is the moment where the theater-level assets that are available to Iran on this track or a variant thereof, as there are several launch sites throughout western Iran, this is where the theater-level assets are going to be launched. That 12 to 16 minute window, especially if they're using solid fuel missiles, is not going to give much heads up to Israel. And if the launch of these missiles is timed simultaneous to a rocket barrage that overwhelms the Iron Dome, as well as a missile barrage from Lebanon and potentially some areas in Syria that takes away some of the capabilities of David's Sling, the Patriot batteries, and the Arrow batteries, we are likely to see significant impacts that could potentially affect all of Israel. And this is where I'm unsure. I know that I think Iran would love to hit Jerusalem and Tel Aviv. There's been talk that Knesset, Mossad headquarters, various IDF bases are some of the targets it's intending to hit. The plausibility of that, I don't know. What I do know, however, is that northern Israel is going to be especially vulnerable. I'm talking about this area right here surrounding Haifa, basically the upper Galilee entirely. And the reason for that is if we are looking at Lebanese, or I should say Hezbollah rocket range, combined with the flight paths from Iran that do not cross over Jordanian airspace in which we're likely to see Jordanian jets active and shooting down incoming projectiles. The zone where missiles are most likely to hit simultaneous to rockets hitting is this portion of the upper Galilee around Haifa. There are a lot of evacuations have taken place, but we saw yesterday an attack against an IDF base that I believe injured 3. Today we saw some Iron Dome failures this morning. Iron Dome just flat out failed when there were just a couple of rockets launched. I believe 6 were injured. I do believe this part of Israel is highly vulnerable. And how is this going to happen? Well, saturation attack, as I just discussed, is the most likely possibility. I do believe that we're going to see coordination with Lebanon and the other militias to overwhelm air defenses. And a lot of these rockets themselves are going to hit just on the basis of sheer volume. But aside from these rockets hitting, I do anticipate some of the theater-level assets that will be launched from Iran. Likely, I would presume the Fateh, the Shahab 3s, the Seiji, definitely the Seiji, I would think, would be making impact in the Upper Galilee. Potentially in Israel more broadly, all the while rocket fire saturation is likely to not only affect civilian areas throughout the region, but also military bases. And don't forget that these have the very significant potential to cause wildfires, right? If there's a significant missile barrage, we're not just looking at actual physical assets or communities or people being attacked. We're also looking at nature being attacked, and that having the very significant potential to then, for example, burn down a neighboring city, which is also a threat. I mean, you know, in modern warfare, attacks against the environment are a type of war, a type of warfare, and are assumed to only grow with time. The other possibility is that we're potentially going to see some wave attacks. That's to say, they'll launch a few barrages of rockets, see how the Iron Dome responds, launch a few missiles from throwaway sites in Iran to test defenses, test response. That's a possibility, although I'm not certain that that will occur, in as much as that would lead to them kind of telegraphing their plans to the Israelis. What I am sure of, though, is that this coordination is going to take place. Now, there are two other potential quote-unquote force multipliers that Iran could make use of to make its attack potentially more violent. Although the likelihood of these being used are, in my opinion, quite low, but not impossible. This one, in my opinion, is quite low. Iran has one Fateh-class submarine. It just has one. It was launched in 2019. It can launch cruise missiles. It's not entirely out of the realm of possibility that it would be used to launch a cruise missile, a barrage of, I think it can hold either 6 or 8 at Israel from a surprise location. But remember, Israel does have naval defenses off the coast. And if Iran used its single Fateh-class submarine to do that, this submarine would be absolutely wrecked. If it's not already being tracked by Israeli Dolphin-class subs, its position would be immediately known, and it would get killed. So I'm not seeing this as a likely occurrence. The more likely occurrence, which I believe it was Ryan Macbeth on YouTube who spoke about this a bit, and I don't think this. I'd put the probability of this happening at below 40%, just because of the high risk level involved, as opposed to just shooting missiles. But theoretically, and let's pick a new color for planes. Let's go with we haven't used blue arrows yet, have we? Let's use bidirectional arrows. Theoretically, if Iran was able to fly, and Iran doesn't have a great air force, mind you, but if Iran was able to fly its MiG-29 Fulcrums, which are still being used in other operational environments, notably in the Ukrainian theater by the Ukrainians and to a lesser extent by the Russians, all of its MiG-29s and all of its old, by our standards, antiquated, these are the MiG-29s. I mean, they are a 4th generation fighter, but they're, and we don't know how well maintained they are. As well as its F4s. I did not pull up a picture of the F4 Phantom, but it is an older, it's actually an American plane, so this would have been provided to Iran during the Shah days. It does not have any effectiveness in air supremacy or anything of the sort, but it is a viable platform for shooting cruise missiles. Could likely load 2. It could likely carry either, presumably 2 on the Phantom, the F4, and potentially 4, but likely 2 on the MiG-29. And we're talking about the use of KH-31 cruise missiles, which have been used to devastating effect in Ukraine by the Russians. This scenario has the Iranians getting a wink, wink, nudge, nudge from Iraq to allow them to use Iraqi airspace while denying access to the Yankees, and the Americans not crossing over, which is dubious in and of itself. But theoretically, while all of these other strikes are going down, Iran could fly the F-4s and the MiG-29s into Iraqi airspace. They wouldn't need to get as far as I put them. Let's say about here-ish. And fire off these cruise missiles with immense and significant coordination with the other assets being cooked off in theater. And this could be absolutely devastating. If this was to successfully happen, I mean, this would cause mass wreckage. Why do I think Macbeth's scenario is not a realistic one? Well, we don't know how well maintained. And Ryan does acknowledge some of these, but for one, Iran's Air Force, we don't know its capacity in relation to spare parts, in terms of maintenance, in terms of political willingness to lose these planes. But perhaps more importantly, the Israelis would not be afraid to send their F-35s, which have an immense standoff distance range, anywhere in anybody's nearby airspace. They do not care. They will do what they wish, especially if they're defending their homeland. And these things would be absolutely cooked. The dilemma that Ryan brings up, which I do agree is an interesting one, is if Iran timed this just right, okay, and these guys started fleeing back into Iran, would the F-35 pilots from Israel chase these guys just to take them out? Or, if Iran was still launching more barrages, would they return and shoot down the other missiles? Logically, you would think they would run and shoot down the other missiles, which is what makes this scenario a non-zero possibility, albeit, in my opinion, a highly unlikely one. But Macbeth goes on to say, and this is not something that I thought of, and I don't know if any of y'all have ever seen these. Hold on. Israeli port shipping cranes for unloading containers in ports. I mean, in terms of effect, what Ryan talks about in terms of targeting these is quite genius, actually, from the point of view of sheer destruction. You can't go to the crane store and buy these I don't remember what they're called, but these unloading cranes. These have to be specially made, apparently with a 16 to 18 month lead time. So theoretically, if Iran were to undertake this scenario, either, well, presumably with these missiles, although it could theoretically hit these ports with MRBMs, short and medium-range ballistic missiles from Iran proper. But if it were to hit these ports on the coast, either with cruise missiles or with planes, it could either just damage the ports and shut off Israeli imports and exports for an extended period of time, or if it knocked out these cranes, I mean, it could proverbially cripple the Israeli economy by virtue of the fact that they could not load or unload cargo vessels. They'd be dependent on ro-ro ships, roll-on, roll-off, which wouldn't suit all their needs. So this would be a devastating scenario. Now, there is also the possibility that Iran strikes civilian targets as its principal targets, I guess is what I should be saying. I personally see this as being somewhat unlikely. Iran doesn't care about civilian casualties, but in that respect, the juice is not worth the squeeze. They're not going to get the quote-unquote bang for their buck if they go at civilians. They're going to be, I mean, they could make the claim that, you know, it's reprisal, eye for an eye, whatever, for what the massacres that Israel's been committing on the Gaza Strip. But it would be strategically inefficient. It would be a poor use of limited weaponry, and it would not do any real lasting damage to Israel as a state. And causing some kind of disruption is what Iran wants to do. So, while targeting humans would obviously be tragic, I do not think that this is going to be Iran's primary goal. I don't think they'll cry or shed a single tear for any Israeli they kill, but that's not the point. Causing infrastructural damage, causing fear, causing chaos, etc., is going to be Iran's main goal in retaliating. And I think that despite the bluster that we're seeing from Israel publicly, and this is not a politically informed statement in any way, you'd expect any country to show this kind of bluster. Unless Israel's capable of engaging in some truly spectacular preemptive strikes to prevent this from happening, I am utterly convinced that Operation True Promise from April is going to look like it was organized by the junior varsity team in comparison to this. I'm not saying that Israel's going to be leveled or wiped up, not even close, but what I am saying is that Iranian missiles and rockets are going to get through, people are going to die, and they're not all going to be shot down like last time. There's significant potential for escalation with this, and who knows where this is going to go, but this attack is not going to be impotent like the last time around. Israel's not being destroyed, nothing like that is going to happen, but missiles are going to get through this time, and people will die. That is inevitable, and where this will go from there, I do not know, and I don't particularly want to know, but we will be seeing that in the coming days. So that's all I have for you today. If you're watching this on YouTube, love it if you dropped a follow and a like on this video. If you're watching on Twitch, thank you for watching. We always stream live on Twitch before posting to YouTube. The link to our Twitch channel and our social media and our website will be in the description. And we do have our first sticker drop coming very soon with our in collaboration with our friend Peter Potts, the artist behind, no, this is not pornography, it's just a miniature model, the Rare Rug Apes. We are going to be dropping a limited edition set of we're calling these David Sling. You guys can obviously see the joke. Making a small batch of these, 50 I think, and we will be selling them when we get them. Obviously, yeah, this is kind of just for, this is the beginning of our sticker series. So yeah, thanks for watching, and this is going to impact financial markets worldwide, so please do govern yourselves and your portfolios accordingly. In the meantime, be well and cheers.